Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
Our backgrounds are a little different when it comes to our development history. For example, I've tended to work either alone or on small teams. And I know, Aaron, in your past lives, you've worked in larger organizations, kind of different levels within the teams. And I know one of the areas this sometimes comes up is when we talk about like access to production. And maybe I have a little more liberal view of who should have access and how that access should be doled out than you do. And I think some of that just has to do with our backgrounds and the different types of projects and teams we worked in. So why don't we talk about this today? I'm sure we're not the only ones that have talked about or have thought about what is the right level of access in production for a developer. But let's give it a shot here today.
Well, I think one of the first questions I would like to ask is, what's the reason for the access? And I think it boils down to two things: troubleshooting or doing things. So I know that doing things is kind of what I mean, like
executing. Can you be more specific?
Nope. Like executing something like, I'm going to go and tinker and do a set of tasks, or I need to alter this file, or I need to change configurations or something like that. Yeah. So to me, those are two separate reasons to kind of consider, understand. And so I want to focus on the easier one first, I think would be troubleshooting. Should devs have access to production for troubleshooting? And I think you're right. It does mean it is a difference between the size of the team and what the roles are. But what has your experience been for troubleshooting on the server? Have you had to do that a lot?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess kind of going back to the earliest days of deploying PHP applications to production, generally where I would start, something goes wrong or something isn't working quite right, is to look at the server logs, right? So that generally, it depends on how the server is set up, but it might even require some privileged access if those logs exist in a folder that my specific login user doesn't have access to. But that's kind of probably the most common scenario for troubleshooting is I would start there. I just need to look at the logs. But beyond that, the other place where sometimes troubleshooting is useful is, the old expression with computers is like, did you just turn it off and turn it back on? That's like a common way to troubleshoot things. So, maybe it's restarting the web server, it's restarting the database, it's restarting the PHP process. But those are kind of the two big things that I historically have wanted access to production in the scope of troubleshooting.
Well, I think that definitely solidifies the difference between our experience and size of teams then, because when you said logs right away, in my head, I was screaming like, why would you be keeping logs on that server? Why aren't you offloading them with some sort of syslog process or using Loggly or any of those tools? And then you set up the access to those logs specifically with who needs to look at those. And so, and I think that probably happens a lot more with larger teams, but I don't think it should be restricted to the size of your team, meaning that if you're even working on something by yourself, consider, do I really want to be on here, like looking at these logs and stuff like that? Or if there's a 2-person team, think about the junior developer. If I give them permission to access the logs, what other things am I giving them permission to do and things like that? And then the other thing for like restarting services, again, I think it really has to do with like, are you the only person that would notice that? Or are there other people on the team that would be like, why did our alerting system suddenly say, Nginx has stopped and restarted? That shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And, suddenly there's a message that goes off to the ops team or something like that. And I would say that I'll argue with you a little bit. Turning on and off again is like a Band-Aid or sticking your head in the sand, because I can think of like almost every single time I've went that route, it came back.
Sure. And, it's not a permanent solution.
Yeah. It's so solve the problem. Stop trying to, push it off. You'll thank me later. Trust me, just solve it now.
Another dimension, probably besides just team size, is the size of the infrastructure. Because, as you were talking about offloading logs or aggregating them somewhere else, like you would have to do that if you had more than one web server. Because like, where would you look? You'd have to are you going to tail logs if you have 10 web servers against all of them? No, you would automatically be aggregating them somewhere. So yeah, these are processes that probably happen on smaller projects, smaller teams, but I also think they're pretty common. There's a lot of devs out there, yeah, in the Laravel world and the PHP world in general that are working on those same sorts of projects that I had a lot of experience on early on.
So I think the other thing that should be thought about is when you're doing troubleshooting, you also should have some sort of like error monitoring tool. And we're huge fans of that, but like Bugsnag or Flare. And so a lot of the information you're going to need is already going to be in that tool, and you don't need to be poking around on a server.
Yeah, absolutely,
for something like that. So I think shifting gears a little bit, the other topic was, or is it to do something?
Right.
Pulling actions on a server or whatever. And that one I'm a little bit more staunch on. It doesn't matter the size of your team. You need to have a history, and you can definitely say you ran into this where things have been done on the server and you had no idea what they were when you took over the project, even as a single developer.
Yep.
And so I'm much more against either a dev having access to the server just to do things, or if they do, it all has to be scripted and in version control and timestamped in such a way that there's a clear trail of what has happened, whether that's PHP scripts, bash scripts, something like Ansible, any tool like that. No running things inside of Tinker just because I have to do this thing real quick. Write a one-time script, run that script, so that happens. So I guess you could say that's access to the server, but run that script and then delete the script, and its history would be in version control versus what did this person do that one time inside of Tinker on the production server.
Aaron, the first time you told me about that, I was really kind of annoyed. I thought, this is silly. Like, what does it matter if I take these 10 lines of code that I could run in Tinker? Like, what is the benefit of packaging this up as a command, committing it to version control, pushing it out as a deployment, and then running that command? But it has saved me, and so you've won me over. And even that history aspect of it, because there's a project I was just touching where we did a whole bunch of data migrations and things now over 2 years ago, and I had to look at it again. And I did look through Git history because we deleted some of those commands even after they weren't needed anymore. But looking in Git history, it was kind of a nice way to replay some of those one-off quote unquote tasks and get that context back without having to write documentation or detailed notes about it. So you've won me over. You've convinced me. You win.
Yeah, I think though, I don't want to oversimplify. Like when someone's listening and saying I'm a single person shop, how can I get it? How can I like not have access to the server when I'm the only one that does something? I think it's a simplification to talk about whether developers should have access to the server. It's more these other things that we've kind of went into is like, are you using the right tools for what you're trying to accomplish? Are you making a trackable history? Are you following any of the rules required in your infrastructure? And then one more I'll put on there is, are you following any of the rules that are required with your certifications? So if you're PCI compliant, you can't necessarily like deploy the code if you've written it. Different levels have different things. So I think it really matters there. And so it's a more complex question than should developers have access to the server. If you just ask me that, I'd probably say probably not. But I would say, but they should have visibility, and they should have the ability to do things to the server, just not necessarily access, which is kind of fine-grained when you think about it.
Yeah, as with so many things in the development world, it's nuanced. There's all sorts of pros and cons and context you have to take into account.
So I've been thinking about how tough it must be, and I know many people will disagree, but how tough it must be to be a dog. No, hear me out. First of all, sometimes you leave them and they really love you, so they notice what you do when they leave, and it's put on your shoes, so they go and destroy them so you can't leave, and then they get yelled at. They're like, come on, I just want you to stay here. Or they don't understand mistakes that happen or stuff like that. So maybe it's dark and dogs probably can see decently and you can't. And so they're just laying there, and then you trip over them and you start yelling. They're like, I'm just laying here and you tripped on me and now you're yelling at me. Or when you go to a place and you don't notice, but there's a no dog sign, and then suddenly everyone's really mad that they're there. They can just see everyone just staring at them like, rah. So what other reason do you think it might be difficult to be a dog?
Um, I will admit I have given almost no consideration to what it's like to be a dog. One interaction I've observed, because we have an older dog, a small dog, little Shih Tzu, and we just got a new cat.
A cat?
Yes.
Oh, so you have two cats.
Okay, I see what you're doing. But no, so the cat has tons of energy. The dog's a little bit older and really never had much energy to begin with. So there are different energy levels. And one thing the dog will do when he gets nervous is he'll wag his tail, which the cat thinks is like a really cool thing to jump at, which makes the dog more nervous. And it's this infinite cycle. So I imagine that's probably kind of difficult for a dog, to think about how another animal is viewing its own actions and it's actually making something worse for itself that it's trying to avoid.
Or I guess the differences in sizes of dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Like two dogs are just hanging out and one can jump up on the couch and cuddle. And then the other one, you're like, get off the couch, you drooling animal. Because it's so big and so large. And yeah, I would think that would be tough. I guess I think probably the most difficult thing in my mind of being a dog is you ask for them to protect the house. And then when someone comes up to the house and they start barking, you bark at them. And then they're supposed to stop, but you're yelling. Like, I think that's super confusing. Like, protect the house, except for if I'm going to bark, then you don't bark. Right?
Yeah. Or they're supposed to identify like the doorbell is not dangerous, but like somebody breaking in the middle of the night is. Like, to a dog, those are both threatening. So why wouldn't you bark at both?
Yeah. Or you yell at them because they hear a doorbell on TV. Like, they don't get what's going on. Like, why did you install surround sound if you didn't want the doorbell to make me run and attack the door?
Well, and to be fair, I've picked up my phone sometimes when I heard like the iMessage sound on a TV show. So I'm probably not one to criticize a dog.
So reasons why it's tough to beat Joel.
Exactly. On our next episode.
Over the last couple of years, we've gathered together tons of tips and tricks and kind of whittled those down to 17.
We've assembled them together into a free ebook, which you can download by visiting our website at nocompromises.io/tips.